So, during the pandemic, there was lots of chatter about physician burnout. For some, it was kind of the first time they had ever heard this term. And though it existed before the pandemic, it just wasn't described or discussed in the way it was in journals and papers and online. So I want us all to consider, what does burnout mean to you? Welcome. This is GynoCurious. I'm Dr. Amy Novatt, the host and creator of the show. From both sides of the speculum, we're here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. Please let me know your thoughts by sending questions, concerns, critiques to gynocurious@gmail.com or comments at radiofreerhinecliff.org. Share the show, rate us on whatever app you listen to podcasts. So I want to welcome Dr. Beth Abrams. Beth has been a guest on GynoCurious before, and I so appreciated her wisdom, her humor, and insights that I asked her to come again. So as a reminder, she's a child and adult psychiatrist who practices and teaches in community and organizational settings. She is also set apart from many of her peers by her deep and probing interest in breath work and how breathing heals our mind, body, and soul. Welcome back, Beth.
Well, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. So I want to start with a topic that is close to both of our experiences as physicians and practicing during the pandemic. And this is the issue of physician burnout and moral injury. So, these topics just got so hot, and I want to talk about it. Also, having worked at the VA system, moral injury was actually a term that I learned really applied to combat soldiers way before physicians. So can you talk about how you define burnout, how you define moral injury, and how it's been in your world?
Sure.
Yeah.
So this is a topic that I was interested in even before COVID.
Yeah.
Because you can't be part of a healthcare system in the last decades without recognizing it all around you. And by the way, I try to find other ways of calling it other than burnout because, it's, I guess like when I teach about it, I'll say, let's find other ways of managing and coping and enriching and refueling so that we look at the enhancing part of it and not the sort of negative. But it is a really negative phenomenon for people.
Yeah.
And it was long before COVID. Our system is such that everyone in the system who works, let's say, in a hospital or even in an outpatient clinic or an outpatient practice is subject to stressors in which the most important parts of our jobs are sometimes crammed by practical things, technical things, red tape and things like that, which really interfere with our being fully present. And, the magic happens not just, because a doctor or a nurse practitioner or someone makes a sort of brilliant diagnosis using the facts, but what happens to that person in the room sharing, it's a sharing experience, right, between doctor and patient or however you want to frame it, whatever language we use. And language is important. Mm-hmm. But, I think that can get lost in the sauce. And a lot of the people that go into these kinds of professions are people that are used to extending themselves and helping others in every part of their lives. And when I say this, I'm talking for myself as well as anyone else who's listening. These are our challenges. It's a gift to be that way, and it's a challenge. And figuring out where to draw a line so that you can, as I always say, put your oxygen mask on first, but it's the truth. On the plane, they don't say put your kid's mask on. They say put yours on.
Right.
So then you can be functioning and actually help someone else. So it's a big issue within the health field. And I think it's a big issue within our whole culture at this point.
I agree.
Because beyond medicine, where we can say, yes, okay, we're doing good work, we're helping others, we're saving lives sometimes, that's very important. But there are many other ways that people dive into their work that is it's terrible in the education system, very profound. So many places in the helping professions, it's grand and very concerning. And also beyond that, in other professions, people just spend so much of their time focused on work.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I don't know, burnout?
Yeah.
Burnout is a phenomenon that happens when we are overworked, underslept, often underfed, don't even get to the bathroom when you need to. When you're living that kind of a work or life, situation, it can be beyond work as well. We can burn out from caregiving of family members. There are so many ways where it can happen. And it's driven by internal and external things. The internal things are what I said about those people who are helpers and who, it's hard to say no. Again, I say that with knowledge, and I think it's particularly hard for women, people identified as women, who have been often enculturized to put other people first. And also because we so much depend on relational feedback, and self-esteem comes from relationships. So again, that saying no is a challenge. And when we get into a situation where we're really not taking care of ourselves physically or emotionally, physiologic things happen. Our bodies start saying, that's not working for us. And so that can take the form of physical complaints, more disrupted sleep, and change in appetite, mood changes, all the psychological things, increased drinking, increased compulsive behaviors, and less of our self-care, although that's become a big industry, the self-care industry. But really caring for ourselves goes out the window. And we get stuck in kind of a cycle of challenge,
Yeah.
And when that happens, we start disconnecting.
Yeah.
And compassion fatigue can occur, which
is part of that moral injury
Absolutely.
term that I use. So let's elaborate on that.
So compassion fatigue is that moment, it's that time when you're so overwhelmed or so tired or so angry at the administration or the million things or a coworker, all those things that are pressured and become more and more intense in the kind of, let's say, healthcare system that we live, that overshadows your natural inclination of being kind and being patient and listening well, all the things that we go into our jobs to do. And when you recognize that, people don't always recognize it's happening, but when you do, then that's definitely a form of moral injury, because you're not able to, in a sense, be in the way that everything you believe should be. You're just not doing things in the way you would want to.
It's about those external constraints that are imposing control that are beyond your own control. So, for example, the electronic medical records that I might have to use day in and day out that keeps going down, where the internet is not working, but I'm still having to see patients and then stay afterwards to write everything down and do it again. And during those moments where I just feel like I can't take care of anything, anyone anymore, where my mission, my heart and mind that has spent a lifetime caring isn't able to care anymore.
Yeah, it's exactly the truth, and it happens, unfortunately.
Yeah. So you mentioned women, and in this context, we're always talking about women who are cis, trans, non-binary. I'm curious, through your work in the VA, which of course is historically a very male-dominated culture and in community, who had to learn how to embrace women in combat and in other positions over the last couple of decades. How you saw the way in which you were treating not only patients who were combat vets, but even the people taking care of them, i.e. clinicians, how they were kind of dealing with the shift in terms of caring for a different gender. And bear with me, I'm being very, male, female, but just for the sake of this conversation, if you will.
Okay, I gotcha. So I think that this is also true beyond the VA.
Absolutely,
once again.
absolutely.
You can be empathetic, and it's not the same as having been there and done that, right?
Unpackage that, please.
Well, and everybody's experience is different, each separate human, and yet there are things that matter in terms of life experience. And when I was a young psychiatrist, I didn't like to really entertain that because I hadn't had a lot of life experiences at that point, right? And I think that, obviously each clinician, each person brings who they are and knowledge probably from past, even so crazy to say, like past lives into the work they do in this life. But, certain life experiences change the picture.
Sure.
So when I was younger, I had a lot more male doctors than I do now. And I just, although I have a brilliant one for my internist right now. So it depends on the human, not the gender or the identified gender and all those things. But I do think that there is something to have someone who's had a period, if you're having going to someone with premenstrual issues or menopausal issues is actually probably quite different when you are talking to a male-bodied person than a woman. So I think those things are very real. And I also think that good clinicians try to learn everything they can about every unique challenge that a person might have, or a unique cultural background or whatever, so that this is part of anyone who's going to be a healer, is to really try to understand the yin, the yang, the
So
complexity.
can the penis haver who's a clinician be truly empathic around menopause and burnout in a woman patient?
I think it depends again on the individual, because
Okay.
there are male identified people. There are men who have been the caretakers for their lives and they continue that role. So it's not a black and white, obviously, dichotomy. But I do think there's something about parenting, for example, if you've never had children. And again, there are brilliant psychiatrists and caregivers who haven't. It's just a different experience. It's a different way. You have no other things that I couldn't possibly know.
Yeah.
Because I have been a mom, know.
Right.
So I think all those things are relevant but hard to talk about, because you're it's not a hierarchy or you're not really saying what's good, what's better, but you're also just saying it's different. And let's acknowledge it, because if we acknowledge it, then we can go long ways to make sure that everybody gets what they need. But if we pretend it's not an issue, then that's a problem.
Yeah. In the DSM, the diagnostics manual that psychiatrists use, is moral injury, burnout, are these diagnoses, do these come under PTSD? How is that discussed in your community?
I have to say that in the latest version, which I haven't really delved into, and I can explain why after, but I do think that there's some of this more included, and there's been, modifications of trauma-related conditions and so on. So I do think it's an accepted phenomenon, and I don't know if there's an ICD-9 code now for or 10 for moral injury, but it's clearly something that we talk about.
Yeah.
For me, those kinds of the diagnostic manual for me is a really nice framework. It's like a list of different sets of problems that can present and then are given a particular diagnosis. What I started telling people after my first few years of psychiatry, when I just went, well, your child has X, and that was it. And that could mean a whole lot of really bad prognostic things for people. But what I learned is, first of all, it's creative writing. It's really, to me, I want to know what the quote diagnosis is, because it gives me an idea of the ranges in which a person may have challenges, right? And it also helps me get insurance paying for things. So those are the two main reasons. But once you pick a diagnosis, whatever it is, depression, anxiety, how that looks in each person, there's such a wide range of that. So I really look at the list of what are this person's strengths, a kind of kooky idea. Let's talk about what they're good at first. And then what are the challenges? And those challenges I also see on a spectrum within every diagnostic category. So you might be highly anxious, but not very active, let's say, or you might be highly anxious and hyperactive, or you might be, on the psychotics, or you may be more fanciful, or may have more, sort of tendency towards a shift in reality. You might be a musician or an artist and be that way, because you can access things like that. So I look at each of my little separate lines in my mind of the things that each of us as humans have as a spectrum. And I see where people fall, and then I decide, well, what do they need? What do they want help with the most? Because it doesn't matter what I want.
Right.
It matters what they want.
Right.
And then from there, we talk about what are the things we can, what are the medications, if it's appropriate, that might address some of the most challenging aspects so that a person can feel like they're actually getting the help they want. And, if you have ideas that might be very relevant, and you can throw those in, and hopefully over time, if they're relevant, they become part of the treatment. But really, the diagnosis is a label and what's in a name,
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I think some folks really glom on to that diagnosis. It defines them. And then there are others who really, feel repelled by it insofar as they don't want to be boxed in. They want someone like you to look at all these different aspects of who they are, positive and negative. And I guess is the goal for all those folks looking for psychiatrists out there, like, how do they find the right doctor for them?
Yeah, well, I think it's a challenge because a lot of those external constraints we were talking about, like those electronic medical records and prescribing and all these things, interfere with being able to look at people and take the time to understand what's going on in a person's life.
Right.
And also, I think the whole medical psychopharmacological, or not psycho, but general pharmacological relationship drives so much of how medical students are trained, how much research is done, in what topics, and how does the data come out? 95% of research projects come out in favor of whoever paid for it.
That's right.
So that's one issue. The other issue is that I think as a group, probably, and my colleagues can say no, but we're people that like certainty and we like science, which it does exist still, just in case anyone was running. There is a real thing called science, even though we know some of those research projects might be driven by many factors. But nonetheless, we like science and we like definition when we can. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the biggest challenges in being a clinician, being a healer, is that we don't know everything. And we like to have ideas that, like, you must take this medicine for blood pressure, elevated blood pressure. But, like, how much research was really done on that one medicine? What do we really know? Well, it makes people feel good. Providers feel good to say, well, there's this data on this and there's this and we have information. And that's a lot easier than saying, well, it might work, but I don't know.
Right.
I'm not sure. And every person is different. So it might work in one person and another person, make them have an anaphylactic reaction. So there's a wide range of possibilities. But all of these things that I mentioned feed into the challenge of trying to find a doctor or provider who's up your alley, because doctors are having so much trouble creating jobs and work that is up their own alley,
Right.
So it's a very delicate time in this evolution of how we care for ourselves and for each other. On every level. And I worry about the kids coming up through the medical schools and the residencies. And, that's something I've been wanting to work on. I did teach for a while. But those are very complicated things, and it makes the challenge of the individual who's trying to get care really difficult.
Yeah. I was thinking about the reality that, of course, we are all individuals. Our psychologies and bodies all have these nuances that set us apart from the person standing next to us, and about the kind of the typical clinician. There is a certain type of person who tends to go into being a doctor, and obviously there are variations on the theme, but are there more clinicians, more physicians seeking psychological care than ever before because of the pandemic, because of the weight of the world, because we've thankfully kind of normalized and spoken out loud about psychology and the mind? That was a lot of questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that there are a lot more physicians in need of care. I think there is still stigma attached to it. Something about, our role as the knower and the doer to then say, I need help, is a different kind of, state of mind. I think there's been a higher rate of suicides amongst medical docs in the last few years.
It surpassed dentists.
That's right. And COVID, I think, tipped that up. And we heard about some of those tragedies along the way.
Yeah.
So I do think that I believe that people are slightly more open to that. I know at the VA, I did programs I tried to get into physicians and to nursing and, the directors and people that were at the upper levels of management people. And when they get the experience of feeling a little different, of feeling a little lighter and brighter, they can start thinking about possibilities. Of not having to feel the way they feel. This very much connects to burnout and the things we started off with. So I do think that it's complicated because everyone is in it's like a big transition period in how we think about ourselves and our world. And I think there's a lot of hope because the more people do get to experience feeling different, feeling better, even in the face of all the challenges in our world right now, that gives hope, and that we can move beyond that place of burnout and that overwhelmed feeling to at least have moments Moments of peace.
Yeah. I call them punctuations.
Yeah.
Yeah. I posit that in the world of allopathic medicine, which is what most of the listeners out there utilize, when you go see a doctor in a conventional office, it's allopathic medicine. That because for so long, allopathic medicine separated the mind and the body and said one doesn't influence the other. And that what we of course know now is that's hogwash, that that people can come in with physical symptoms that are a manifestation of emotional states, that people can come in with emotional states that then shift into illness, that there is this kind of wonderful yet challenging fluidity. As I say, we have a neck for a reason. The brain and the body are connected, and our emotional experiences all wrapped up in who we are. So I'm hoping that with that shift, that very, very slow shift, there are still physicians I meet who are not willing to talk about this, who don't even really believe it, which is really unbelievable, who, because there's this movement towards an understanding of the mind, body, spirit connection, that hopefully the way that we're looking at burnout, moral injury, kind of all diagnoses in that DSM-3 book or whatever it is, DSM-10 or whatever it is, that there's a gentleness, that there's an honoring, that there's a willingness to be more accommodating, and particularly for physicians, because it's we're both physicians, so that's why we're talking about it today. But I've seen so many physicians suffer in silence.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not actually, it's not new, this idea that the mind, body, and spirit are connected, right? Thousands and thousands of years of knowledge and current practices.
But what about the AMA and allopathic medicine? They have separated the two
absolutely
for a long time.
Yeah, and may I add, it was a mainly male-driven phenomenon, but I just can't help saying that. But nonetheless, I do think there are ways to eke our way in. That's why I went to the VA to work, because I wanted to share these techniques. And the VA is actually fairly open to a lot of these things. People think about the VA as a sort of a, bureaucratic medical institution, but they have been trailblazers in a lot of areas of medicine for the good. But there's so much knowledge out there now, ancient and current, around the world, that we can access. And people do it naturally. Humans have been doing the things that rebalance our mind, body, spirit since we stood up on our feet. And it's really about reminding ourselves, reminding individually and in a group what we are capable of and what we really know about healing and what our body needs. And we've gotten so far away from that through the allopathic model. Before 200 years ago, a doctor would hold someone's hand, or the equivalent, wasn't called a doctor or whatever. They would be there for the family. They would be present in all these other ways. And they would create syrups and other things that were made from herbs and from things that were sort of common knowledge in those times. But, capitalism and, economics and many other things affect what knowledge is available, what access we have to ways of healing, at least in the most conventional settings.
So here we are in 2024. What would you say to a clinician, or really anyone out there who's suffering from a feeling of hopelessness and helplessness vis-a-vis their work in particular? What would you say are the first steps? What should they do?
So I think one thing I always like to say is the 95% rule, which is that anything you're experiencing, 95% of the people around you are experiencing as well. It may look more like a Facebook post, but it's real. You're not alone. And because people get very judgy about themselves, why can't I cope? Why am I, all those things, that voice and that, derails our best selves, And so you're not alone. And then it does go back to finding ways to insert tiny bits of that self-care, that rebalancing stuff into your day-to-day work even. And you need to know them, so you need to learn about them if you don't know about them. And I feel like there are now more and more resources.
Give us just a short list of that, if you will.
So, okay. So, you know when the electronic medical record gets frozen and there's this little circle going around for a half hour?
That beach ball.
And this happens at other times on other computers, not just at EHRs. However, that's a great time to sink into your chair and slow your breath.
Huh.
Now, I know that sounds insane, and how could you? It's so much more fun to like want to throw the computer out the window and have images
You
of
felt that way too?
Yes, 95% rule. So I really do that. And I did that at the VA because that could happen a lot. Even though I think it's a great electronic medical record, having used others, I will bow down to that EHR, though I know it has it has to be modernized. But in any case, I loved that record compared to other places. Anyway, so that's a moment when you're waiting in the elevator and you're on the 10th floor, right? And it could be a long wait. Really good time to slow your breath. Some people say when you walk through a doorway, just take one big breath. So those are just breath things. Get outside for 5 minutes and sniff the air.
So important.
Use your body. Take a short walk. Now, did I do that all the time at the VA? Absolutely not. I worked from 6:30 in the morning when I didn't have to be until 8, and I stayed until sometimes 11 o'clock at night because I like to call patients and stuff after. However, I did breathe a lot during the day because I made part of my work all these refueling things. And as a physician, what I'd say is that if you learn to incorporate any of these little mini practices into your work and hopefully your life, you can also integrate them into the work you do with people.
Yeah.
You know, there's no law that doesn't say when someone comes in and you're like running and you're 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 30 minutes late, you can't say, all right, hi. Let's just take one moment and take 3 breaths together before we start.
Oh, it's delicious just hearing you say
We could
it.
do it right now if you want. And at home. One slow breath in. But anyway, that's the kind of thing. If you keep it in the forefront, that's key. Other things, well, I used to say, do you want a prescription to watch 5 minutes of YouTube comedy? Pick your favorite person that makes you laugh and watch that. Or your favorite movie if you have more time. So that's another thing. We talked about being in nature. So healing, so much research now on what that does to rebalance our nervous systems, our spirits, our hearts. Use your hands. Doing things with our hands are very powerful. Remember the homunculus on the brain? The amount of brain space that our hands take up is huge. When we use our hands, we impact a lot of the brain.
We're not just talking about typing at the computer, please.
No, I was going to say it doesn't include thumb activity on the phone. Yes, but it can be anything. And then creative expressive arts, of course. So music affects the brain like nothing else in human or universal existence that I'm aware of on a neurological level.
Not as much, but...
Yes, that's the other thing, because it's music and rhythm and body movement.
Right.
So all these things, but it could be building a new engine. You know, it's the thing about using your hands and your body and your mind for creative things, to make and to do, making and doing. And then we have to do a lot of these things anyway. So you might as well embrace them. You know, you could cook miserably or you could cook joyfully. Easier said than done sometimes. I'm not saying it's not a pain when you're a single mom and you have to get food on the table and all that, but it's about trying to build the awareness so that in each thing you do, you can bring in some little piece that rekindles or refuels you.
That's the morsel that all of us live, most of us live very busy, full lives. And not always full of fun, you know, full of responsibilities and impositions, et cetera, et cetera. So what you're pointing out, Beth, to the audience is it doesn't take a lot. It could take moments, maybe even just a minute, where you just set everything aside and again take a deep breath. You know what I like to do? I like to sing. And I could be just humming or singing a silly tune and I don't sing the whole song because, as my family reminds me, I never remember lyrics. I just make them up and I just sing, and it just breaks up it just takes me away from the place that I'm otherwise feeling angry or upset or frightened or overwhelmed, or I don't want to do this anymore, not 1 second more. So that's what we're trying to share with everyone.
Yeah.
Is it doesn't take, you don't have to go to an hour and a half yoga class, then follow with, pranayama breathing, and that if you have a life that allows you to do that, okay, great. But most of us don't.
Right.
You don't need to spend money. You don't have to have a fancy gym or studio. I like to talk about how the bathroom is the most convenient breathing space there is.
Indeed. So there are two things about what you just said. One is that you don't have to take a lot of time to have very efficacious experiences with certain kinds of practices. And, some of the stuff that I teach has been sort of curated to be rapidly effective, easy to learn, not expensive. So that's one thing. On the other hand, if you do take on something like, I'm going to breathe for 5 minutes a day, and then you maybe get up to 10 minutes, and then you even take 20 minutes a day, 20 whole minutes out of your life, what you do find is that when you come into that calm, alert state that it allows you to be in when you do these kinds of practices, you're more efficient at everything you do. You roll with the punches, so to speak, and go with the flow much more easily, and you're happier because you're just nicer. Not only that, but it raises your oxytocin, which we love because it makes us love and be more comfortable, not literally love, but be more comfortable in social situations. So if you do make the investment, and you sleep better and longer, more efficiently. So when you take that 20 minutes out of your day, you're actually gaining probably 3 times that amount in terms of functionality, and who can put the price on contentment, right?
That's right.
So that's one thing. The other thing, I just can't resist talking about the science of singing in particular, as that is my other gig. I'm going to go to a gig right after this, actually. I do sing, and I am convinced and feel like to not include creative expressive arts in any formula for healing and wellness is just completely, frankly, useless in my mind, because this is what humans do to refuel and to rebalance. But particularly it's interesting that the voice, which comes from our voice box right in our neck, has a set of nerves that run on both sides of that voice box called the vagus nerves, and they connect the brain to the body. And this is the major highway for all information going up to the brain and back out to the body, and very complicated and amazing system. But what I want to say is that when we change how we breathe, it affects the stimulation of the vagus nerves. And the vagus nerves are the nerves that give our body the signals and help sort of make the whole connection between our stress response and our relaxation response work. And these vagus nerves are, the head of relaxation on one hand. When it's been studied that when you slow the breath to certain rates, you enlist your parasympathetic nervous system, that relaxation system. It's much more complex than this, but it's clearly documentable scientifically. And if you increase the resistance of the breath, you enhance the effect of the downregulation of the sympathetic.
You got to demonstrate that.
Okay. So people that have done yoga perhaps have heard of ujjayi breath or ocean breath. So I don't know if that comes across, but it's like it's like someone takes a sip of a lemonade. I like to say lemonade, not a beer. Lemonade in the really hot weather, and you that is an exhalation with increased resistance. But so is singing, and so is chanting, and so is blowing bubbles, which I will recommend to people sometimes. Not in a glass, although that's good too, but I like the bubbles that float around the room. And, of course, chanting, prayer, it's all whistling. There's a reason why there's a song called Whistle a Happy Tune, or whenever I feel afraid, I whistle a happy tune. Mm-hmm. We know what to do with our bodies. Why do we put our hands on our hips, breathe in, and go when we're annoyed? We are, we did it again. We went with that resistance breath thing.
Right.
But the voice and the brain and the musical aspects of voice have a huge effect on the brain. And when you sing alone and when you sing with others, obviously there are very different important effects, just like dance. And by the way, dancing and singing is really fun and really good and aerobic. But, it might take a little training. But most humans do it, right? How much dancing and singing has happened in the history of humans?
I remind myself, as a younger person, I used to go to places where people danced. I don't do that so much as an older person. So I turn on music in my house, turn it up really loud, and I dance. And I'm not a great dancer, but I just move my body, even if it's just shaking. In Tai Chi, pardon me, in Qigong, there's this practice of literally just shaking the body, and it just moves energy. It moves your fascia and your tendons, etc. So thank you. That was really helpful. And as we move towards the end of this podcast, I want to ask I hope you don't mind. When you sing out loud, do you have a favorite song or phrase or, refrain? I'm just curious.
Well, I do have a wide repertoire.
I bet you do.
With roots in granola and jazz as I'm a jazz musician now. However, I will say, and since you asked, I'll be completely honest.
Please.
I spent a few days ago with a beloved person in my life as she was transitioning from her body. She was dying, my mother in love. And there was a song that I sang to her and that I like to sing for other occasions when I'm working with people. That's called Gentle with Myself.
Could you sing us a line? Are you comfortable doing that?
Well, I can tell you that it'll be hoarse and garbly, but I can do it anyway because that's not what it's about.
That's right.
It is not what it's about.
That's right.
And anyway, okay. So Karen Drucker has a beautiful recording of this, and I'm hoping to get in the studio and do one too. But anyway, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath first. I will be gentle with myself. I will be gentle with myself. And I'll hold myself like a newborn baby child. I will be easy on myself. I will be easy on myself. And I'll hold myself like a newborn baby child.
What a gift to all of us. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I think Jen and I just settled into our chairs, and you had your eyes closed. Everyone in the audience can't know that, but I saw it, and it was lovely. And as you might remember from the last time we spoke, I love to end GynoCurious by talking about pleasure. And you just infused this room with pleasure. I hope for yourself. I know for yourself as well as for us. So thank you. And for the audience.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I love getting to talk with you.
I know. Feelings are so mutual.
And I think that the reason that your eyes twinkle so much is because you sing. You take that time to sing and dance. If we just took a moment to sing and dance,
Yeah. The world is heavy right now, so just taking that time for yourself. If you have kids, embrace it, make it part of your day routine. Figure out a way that you can follow some of these recommendations that Dr. Abrams has given to us today. Get outside, breathe, sing, dance, find moments of joy. It's so important to your mind and your body. These are all connected. Thank you for listening to GynoCurious today. Thank you to my co-producers, Jen Hammoud and Maddie Rosenberg, and to the Epicurean, who houses Radio Free Rhinecliff. Please, until next week, until our next episode, stay well and listen to your instincts and intuitions. They are the greatest of teachers, not to be ignored.